I've worked for the United States Forest Service here in Texas for just shy of 10 years now. I love my job, and it's rare for anything particularly creepy or scary to occur, but having worked this job for so long, I have my fair share of stories I can share that might just make the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. For example, we sometimes get jaguars hunting in the forests here, a particularly scary big cat, and that's because of what they do with their prey once they're caught and subdued. So just picture the scene. You're walking through the trees on some bright, sunny day when all of a sudden you start to smell something rotten. You look around, but there's nothing to be seen, just a picturesque view of the pines and the sound of birdsong floating through the green. Then something hits the top of your head, something wet. You place a hand on the top of your head, feeling something cold and slimy dribbling through your hair. You bring your hand down to see what it is, hoping it's not bird crap, only it's something way worse. It's blood. You look up, and hanging up in a tree, just feet above your head, is the mutilated, half-eaten corpse of an animal. Guts torn out, skin shredded, face half-eaten with hooves or paws missing, with broken pieces of bone protruding from cracked limbs. It seems an utterly bizarre thing to do, but the jaguar has a good reason for doing all this heavy lifting. If a jaguar does not bother to hoist its kill into the tree, it risks losing its meal to other more ground-based predators or scavengers. Creepy, yeah, but that kind of natural world stuff is nothing compared to some of the other stuff I've encountered during my time in the Forest Service. So this other time, I'm on a routine walk through some of the trails to make sure all the directional signs and information markers for tourists are in order. There's a large rock protrusion about 100 meters off of this trail, like this big sandstone boulder that juts out of the earth that is kind of like a shallow cave carved out on one side that's been worn away from thousands of years of wind erosion. As I get close, I see a guy in what I first thought was camouflage hunting gear hanging around the entrance. I call out to him, just some friendly greeting, nothing threatening, and he turns to look at me. Only he doesn't say a word, he just runs off through the trees. I start getting worried about what he was doing in the cave, terrified he's left a body or something there, and honestly, I thank God that he hadn't. But it seems like he did leave something behind. I mean, I'm not even 100% sure it was him that did this, and I've often considered the possibility that it was him that happened across this little find first, and seeing me got the idea in his head that it was me that left those things there. He got that idea into his head, saw me, and just freaked. But when I walked into that little cave and shined my flashlight around, I saw something that would completely explain why he was so quick to run away, whatever his motivations for doing so were. Teeth. There was a little circular patch of dirt, one that looked like it had been raked over to clear some space. And in the middle of it all were a bunch of human teeth. I don't know why they were there, I don't know who left them, or why. But I did what I could. I gathered them up into a little plastic bag I had on me that had previously contained my lunch, and took them down to the nearest police station, giving a little description of the guy that I'd seen run away from the cave. I've had the usual wild animal encounters, weird noises during the night. But I've never forgotten those teeth. I have no explanation to offer up at all, but it certainly does make for a good little campfire story. I used to work as a park ranger at a well-known, frequently visited national park. At this particular national park, there was an old ghost story that the veteran rangers used to tell about one of our number who heard a noise coming from a lake one day. The noise had apparently sounded like a puppy yelping and splashing, but the ranger who heard it couldn't swim and wasn't about to put himself in danger of drowning just to save a dog. The next day, the body of a young child washed up on the shore. It was never a dog out there, it was a child that had fallen in the lake after being out there exploring unsupervised. The ranger was devastated, his spirit crushed that his selfishness had resulted in the death of an innocent child. He was haunted by the thought, took to drinking, wore himself down until one night, while sleeping in his cabin, he heard a familiar noise coming from the lake. It was the sound of a little boy crying out to be rescued. He ran to the lakeside, dived into the water, and struggled his way into the center of the body of water until he reached the site of the splashing. But there, he only saw the smiling, bloated corpse of that same little boy who dragged him beneath the lake and drowned him, just as he had. That's the way the story went, and to be honest, I thought it was the biggest load of bull I'd ever heard in my life. I told the crusty old-timers that same thing, that I'd have to be of diminished capacity to believe a crock of bullcrap like that. But instead of laughing or whatever, like, okay, maybe this guy isn't as dumb as we first thought, they got all pissy about it. They told me not to disrespect the angry spirits of the departed, but then it was my turn to laugh. I could tell the difference between them getting annoyed over me disrespecting the dead or whatever, and them getting annoyed over me just disrespecting their dumb stories. The following week, I found I'd had my shift pattern switched to nights. I confronted them about it, told them I was not impressed that they were that immature as to switch my shifts up, but they insisted that it was only cover for a guy whose mom had taken ill and had been forced to drive back to his home state in order to care for her. I didn't believe a word of it, and I was just straight up angry at that point, angry that a pair of grown-ass men would lie about something like that, basically just to gaslight me. But I didn't want to show them how frustrated I was. I'd just take their crap on the chin, so to speak, and not give them the satisfaction. So the first night I'm there in the lakeside cabin, I'm settling in to prepare for a long night of utter boredom, brewing coffee and playing dumb mobile games when I hear something from outside the cabin. I put down my phone, get up, and walk over to the door to open it up so I can listen out for what it is. But I recognize it instantly. It's the sound of splashing, coupled with the sound of a child crying out for help between spluttered breaths. Haha, dickheads, very funny. I remember shouting out into the darkness. Think you can scare me with your dumb stories? Well, I didn't believe them then, and I don't believe you now. Try it on someone with an IQ as low as yours. This was obviously their little game playing out, their attempt to scare me into submission and believing their backward-ass ghost story. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I went back inside, slamming the door shut and jamming my AirPods in on full volume to block the noise out. They were selfish, vindictive bastards, that's what I told myself anyway. But apparently not determined enough to keep playing that sound from whatever speaker system they'd set up around the cabin, because when I paused my music like 20 minutes later, the noise was gone and all was quiet again. The next morning, just after sunrise, I pack up my stuff and prepare to leave the cabin. I was so exhausted and irritated by the prank they pulled, I wasn't prepared to wait for them to arrive. I figured if I did, I'd be so angry at seeing them that I might have knocked some of their goddamn teeth out. That would get me fired, and I simply could not afford that, not with the economy in the state that it was. But as I'm walking to my truck, something catches my eye from the lakeside, something small and sodden that the gentle waves of the lake lapped against. I turned to look and saw what it was, and when I did, I dropped my bag in pure horror and disbelief at what I was staring at. It was the body of a child, face down in the dirt. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and basically screamed at the operator for an ambulance to get out to the place I was based at. They had to send a helicopter in the end, but before it showed up, the two crusty old rangers rolled up in their truck, and their goddamn eyeballs almost fell out of their heads when they saw me trying to perform CPR on the dead kid. I tried, and I tried, and I tried. But he was gone, long gone. And it was all my goddamn fault. I ended up word vomiting about what had happened the night before, telling them everything, how I thought the whole thing was part of a prank, part of the punishment for not believing their goddamn story. They claimed to have no idea what I was talking about, which angered me even more. But when they asked me why I didn't help the kid, I flipped. I rushed one of the older guys, tackled him, and beat the living hell out of him before I was dragged off and talked back down to earth. But I couldn't ever really calm down, not until the chopper arrived and put that kid's body on a stretcher. The paramedics seemed furious, there was no one to save. I remember one of them explicitly shouting over the din of the rotor blades that the kid's been dead for hours. When they took off, and I drove back home to go on indefinite paid leave, I thought that might have been the end of it, and that I'd have the time and space to get over what had happened. But I didn't have time. Someone leaked information on what had happened. I don't know if it was the old timer I decked, the other ranger, or the paramedics. But somehow, someone got a hold of my contact details, and the threatening calls began. I'll never forget the night my girlfriend answered the phone in our apartment, saying hello in that happy, chirpy way she always used to. I watched as her face went from all smiley to neutral to downright horrified. "Who is this? Hey, who the hell is this? Call here again, and I'm calling the cops." It was the first of many death threats, the first of many, many calls, handwritten letters, and emails that told me I was an awful person, that I didn't deserve to live, that I was dead to the world the night I let that poor, innocent young boy drown in that lake. When his lungs filled with water and the death spasms racked his body, he wasn't the only one to die. I died too. Needless to say, she wasn't my girlfriend for much longer, and I don't even blame her. There aren't many people who could handle that kind of abuse, and I only got through it myself by the skin of my teeth. And so that led me to where I am today. I live alone, in a state far, far away from the national park where I allowed a child to drown. I legally changed my name, changed my entire look so no one from my old life would be able to recognize me. I went through an intense period of transformation. The old me is a ghost, as good as dead, dust in the wind. And no one will ever find me. No one. Growing up, I was always on the heavy side. I suppose it's because I come from a family of food lovers whose portion control was never their strongest suit. It was all TV dinners and sedentary hobbies, so it's no wonder we were all of a certain size and shape. But it always bothered me. I'd see the attention skinnier girls got around school, and I know it doesn't align with my mostly feminist view of the world, but I wanted that to be me too. So a few years back, I started my own personal weight loss journey. Not so much so I could fit society's view of what beautiful is, but so that I could have confidence in myself and in my body. I wanted to look good for me, and if that helped me land a hot guy, then cool. This is how I ended up taking up hiking as a hobby and why I spent so much time around Acadia National Park up here in Maine. The views up there also allowed me to indulge another hobby of mine, photography, and sure, my pictures don't make it any further than my Instagram account, but still, it's something that brings me a lot of joy. Sometimes I'd drive up there with friends, but they couldn't commit to those long trips all the time, so there were times when I'd have to go up to Acadia alone in order to get my few hours of exercise in. So I'm hiking the trails up there, taking pictures of the way the sun glinted off the ocean through the trees, messing around with filters, the usual photography stuff. I thought I'd managed to get this one amazing shot, something that was bound to get a whole bunch of attention on Instagram when I hear a voice sounding from behind me. "Lovely day for it, huh?" It was a man's voice, friendly sounding, but still, the shock of hearing it so suddenly made me jump. I turned, seeing a man in a park ranger's uniform, the hat, the little shorts, the whole get-up, walking up the trail behind me with one of those trekking poles in his hand. Yeah, gotta make the most of the nice weather here in Maine, it's super rare. I tried to sound as cheerful as possible, but I won't lie, I didn't really want the attention, at least not from an older guy like that who'd also managed to ruin the composition of the photograph I was in the process of taking. I know that makes me sound unfriendly or whatever, but honestly, sometimes us girls just prefer to be left alone. But he continued to make conversation, in that super annoying way that some people do. It's like they can detect that you just want to have some time to yourself and opt for being gregarious. So I remained polite for as long as I could, nodding along as he talked about how lonely it could get being a park ranger up here, then eventually just straight up asked him politely to leave me to my photography, making something up about being a professional photographer who was surveying the area for a magazine I worked for. I know, I shouldn't have lied, but I got the distinct impression he wasn't going to leave me alone otherwise. But he took it on the chin. I suppose he got the craving for human contact out of his system. He told me he was so sorry to interrupt, wished me luck with my work, then carried on down the trail. So I take my photos, taking my time over them, but decide to turn back and walk the opposite way so I don't run into him again. I didn't think he was creepy or anything, I just didn't want to have that awkward moment of running into the guy again and being all like, oh hi again. Call me neurotic for wanting to avoid that, but that's just the way I felt about it. So I'm heading back the opposite way, taking pictures along the way, capturing the way the trails snake through the trees in such pretty ways sometimes, looking like something out of a fairy tale. I happen to take a particularly aesthetically pleasing one, and I'm admiring it on my phone when I happen to notice some small detail in the center right of the frame. It was a figure, clearly wearing a pair of shorts, peeking out from among the trees. I know that's a pretty innocuous little detail, I know it was just the ranger I had seen like an hour previously. But it sent a chill through me. Just how the hell had he managed to loop around and get ahead of me, even though he walked off in the opposite direction of what I had? I felt distinctly unsafe, a flash of fear running through me as I began to suspect that this ranger guy's intentions were far from good. I mean, who just follows someone like that? Or rather, it wasn't even following me that he was doing, this guy was straight up stalking me. But I had no choice but to walk by him. He had literally put himself between me and my car, so I had to just suck it up and walk past him, even if it was putting on a brave face to do so. I tried to, cut him off, if that makes sense. I was prepping myself to just be like, hi there, can't stop, late back for a meeting or something to that effect. But it was him who spoke first. You know, it's just not safe for a girl like you to be walking around the park alone. I can't remember exactly what he said, that's just my estimation of it. You're real pretty, and bad things can happen to a pretty girl that walks around on her lonesome. I was ruined. I tried to think of something witty to say, some cutting retort that would shame him for being way too familiar. But I couldn't, I was just terrified. Who the hell says that to a total stranger? So I just carried on walking at an increased speed, ready to call 911 if he started to follow me. But he didn't, he just shouted like, where you going? Don't you want some company? Take care being rude like that, little lady, you might just end up being rude to the wrong person. I thought crap like that only happened in horror movies or something, that creeps like that couldn't really be walking among us, or that if they were, I suppose I just hoped I'd never encounter one. So I get to the end of the trail, back to the parking lot where I'd left my car when I see another ranger milling around the area, taking like little markers out of his trick or whatever. I walk up to him and demand to know who the other ranger on duty was, describing the way the guy looked, how his uniform was all dirty and stuff, how he carried that trekking pole when suddenly I just started to feel sick. This other ranger, his uniform looked almost nothing like the guy back in the woods. It was clean, pressed, and starched, a lighter khaki color with different styles of patches on it. Same kind of Maine Park Service kind of thing, just different looking. I knew what he was going to say before he even said it. There was no other park ranger on duty at the time, he was the only guy in the area, and no one else should have been wearing a ranger's uniform. He saw the look of horror on my face, that nauseous, shell-shocked look as I realized just how much danger I had been in walking around with that guy on the loose. I told him everything, but I didn't stick around to see what came of it. I just got in my car and headed back north towards Ellsworth, and it took me a long time before I was able to go back to Acadia, even with friends. And I make a point of never, ever going to secluded places like that alone now. It's just not worth the risk of running into someone like that, someone willing to dress up in order to trick young women into feeling safe when, in reality, they may well have very different intentions.